going to share my screen. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Give me just a second to share my screen. All right. Okay, welcome everyone. We've got a lot of really good things to talk about today, new things. I'm glad that we had so many people join us. Hopefully more will continue to join us as we go, but of course we are recording this meeting and we'll make sure we get it sent out because today we're going to be talking about a good bit of new things, new guidance in regards to MOUs/MOAs, contracts, and CMP guidance. Saving the CMP for last because that's probably the most exciting new guidance that we'll be providing. But we're going to talk first about MOUs and contracts. Just to give you a little bit of background information, if you were at ACA, I did a session there about procurement, and at the time I had created an MOU. I had created two different MOUs for the 21st Century Program. One that was geared more towards contracted services where we were paying someone from outside of our or where you guys were paying someone from outside of your organization to provide a service, such as paying for a local art studio person to come in and teach art classes to your 21st century kids. That's just for an example. And then another that was more of an MOU that was geared more towards partnerships where there wasn't necessarily money being exchanged, but it was more of like volunteer work and that sort of thing, like maybe an agreement you would have with a local church or a nonprofit agency. And at that meeting, I told you guys that I'd created those documents, but I was planning to send them to Tiffany Kessler with Bruman to look them over and make sure that they were accurate and they had all the correct wording in it. I don't know if you guys have heard me say this before, but the template, the MOU template that we've provided to you guys in the past, I knew just from going to different sessions about Edgar and the Uniform Grant Guidance that there was wording missing in those MOUs that needed to be in there, and I knew they needed to be revised. And so that was one of the things that I had planned to work on. So anyway, when I sent her those two documents, she emailed me back and said, well, I'm a little confused. Why would you do an MOU with a contract where you're contracting or paying someone? Typically, we call that a contract. It could be called an MOU in certain circumstances, but in general, most of the time that would be considered a contract. And I said, oh, well, we've always called it an MOU in the past, as far as I know. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing. And so she let me know that we did need to have two documents, but one needs to be an MOU and one needs to be more of a contract. So let's talk about the differences between those two things, or at least according to Tiffany. So when it comes to memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement, those can be used interchangeably. But according to Tiffany, using that document should be limited to understandings or agreements between the 21st Century Program and the LEA that your program is in, where you wouldn't necessarily bid out that work outside of the LEA. So an example of this would be if you're contracting with the LEA for transportation for your kids to go to be taken home after your after-school program, or if you're doing an MOU or MOA with your CMP program to provide services. She said it could also be used for agreements between the 21st Century Program and a nonprofit or a group that's providing some sort of volunteer assistance where there isn't money being exchanged. One thing she did want to make sure that I said in this was that they shouldn't be used to avoid procurement laws and rules and regulations involving procurement. So to keep you from having to do a bid or a quote when it should normally be necessary for you to do so. Okay. So let's talk about contracts. So for a contract, First thing I want to say is you should follow your LEA's documented procurement procedures to determine if a contract is necessary for the purchase of the goods or services. So this would be contracting for either goods or services from a vendor from outside of your LEA who's not necessarily doing volunteer work. You're paying them with 21st century funds to either provide a service or to provide some goods. Okay. Now, different LEAs have different rules for procurement. Some LEAs may require contracts for if you're purchasing something over a certain amount of money. Some LEAs may require a purchase order for the same thing. So it varies depending on LEA to LEA. Now, for my CBOs who are listening, you should also have documented procurement procedures. And if you don't have those in writing, then please contact us and let us help you develop those, because that is something that is a requirement from the federal government for you to have those documented procurement procedures in place so that you can follow those procurement procedures. Okay, so I promise we won't be mean or anything like that. We want to make sure that if you're ever audited, blah, can't speak, that you have those procurement procedures in place so that you will not get in trouble. Okay. Now, as far again, if you're going to use a contract, everybody, whether you're using contracts or purchase orders or whatever, you must follow the state and federal methods of procurement. And so that is these different types of purchases. So a micro purchase would be a purchase of something that is less than $10,000. In that case, you would not have to do a competitive. You would not have to get quotes, do a competitive price solicitation for under $10,000. Then there's small purchase procedures that is above $10,000 and less than $250,000. In that case, you have to obtain price or quotes from multiple sources. For sealed bids, for purchases greater than $250,000, you would have to do a competitive bid, which I don't think any of you would need to do that. And then you would have to use competitive proposal procurement standards when using those sealed bids, if that's what you're doing. Okay. Again, you're probably only going to be working with micro purchases, maybe small purchase procedures. I know that here with 21st Century, we have asked that you submit to us any expenses that are over $5,000 for us to look at. That's been done in the past, and that's kind of one of my next things to look at as to whether we need to raise that to the $10,000 amount to fit that micro purchase guidelines from the federal government and from the state. So that's forthcoming. Right now, we're sticking to what you currently have to do, but that could be a potential change coming up in the future. All right, so as you know, we typically, at least for purchase services, we ask you to upload, in the past, we've asked you to upload the MOU into your EGAP document, required documents for us to review that. And this is the reason why. According to 2 CFR 200.318, that is in EGGR, the Uniform Grant Guidance, grant recipients and subrecipients must maintain oversight to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contracts or purchase orders. So it's our responsibility and your responsibility to make sure that when you're contracting for services, whether it's through an actual contract or a purchase order, that contract or purchase order spells out exactly what services are being provided, the amount of money you're paying. It needs to be detailed, and that has definitely not been asked in the past. That has definitely not been required in the past. And so that is something that needs to be done from this point forward. We need you to make sure that you have bullets in that contract or in that purchase order, whichever your LEA requires or whatever your guidelines require, that explains exactly what services or goods are being provided and that they're detailed and that they're not just a general statement. That's what I see a lot. And when I'm looking at your MOUs, a lot of times it's just simply a statement of what your goals are, and it basically says this vendor is going to help us meet these goals. That's not good enough, guys. We need you to say how they're going to do that. Are they going to provide tutoring services? Are they, how often are they going to do that? How many hours are they going to work per week? What are you paying them per hour? What exactly are they going to be doing? And so you need to make sure that your contracts are very detailed in this way, and they include a full picture, a full scope of the services that are being provided. So for now, we're going to continue that. Now, I am thinking about, thinking about making changes in the future, because I know it is a burden for you to have to upload these things into EGAP as you do a contract with someone, having to do a budget revision or having to do a contract revision, not contract, I'm sorry, an EGAP revision just to upload an MOU. In the past has been an MOU. Now we're going to call it a contract to upload that contract so that we can look at it. I know that's a burden. So we're considering, I'm considering thinking of a way to make that easier. But for now, we're going to continue to do what we've done in the past. But I've had a couple of LEAs reach out and say, hey, we don't do contracts for that service. We do a purchase order. And basically say, well, I don't have to do this because we use a purchase order, not a contract. Well, according to this regulation that I just read to you, we need to make sure that the purchase order also has the things in it that it's supposed to have. So whether you're using a contract or a purchase order to pay these people or to contract the services with these people, we would need you to upload that into EGAP for us to review it, okay? So that we can make sure that the appropriate terms, conditions, and specifications are included in there. And of course, I've mentioned this in the past. I also want to just look and see who it is that you're hiring for different things. I know I think there was only a handful of times that I had to question a vendor that was being hired this past year. And if I do question it, it's just me doing my due diligence to make sure that somebody's not hiring their cousin, who's a good drawer to teach art lessons to the kids, when it would be more appropriate to hire someone who is has a degree in art, or who owns an art studio, or has some sort of business where that's what they do for a living. And so those are the types of things that we would ask questions about. So we're going to continue that for now, but you would need to use this new contract for anything going forward. We'll get to that in just a second. These new contracts, the new contract and the new MOU form that is going to be uploaded, will include all the federally required provisions. That is another important thing. That was one of the things that made me realize, that was one of the first things I realized that we needed a change to, was that a lot of those federally required provisions, and they're just basically statements about the contract, they need to be included. And so some of you use your LEA's contract, and that's fine as long as they do have those required provisions. They should. But just check to make sure that they do have the required provisions in it, or you can use the template that will be provided to you. All right. And I'm sorry I'm doing it this way, but if I try to do a slideshow, with the two screens on my desk, it goes crazy. So that's why you're seeing all of my typos and things like that. Sorry. All right. So I was hoping to have it done today, but I just wanted to make sure I didn't get a chance to get it sent to the guy who does all of our EGAP stuff. Jason Isaacs, I don't know if any of you know him, but he works with federal programs, or he did work with us with federal programs, and he was our EGAP guru, and he was the one who would upload things like this to EGAP. Well, he's just recently left and gone to Montgomery Public Schools, and so we have a new person who will be uploading things for us. So I will get that hopefully sent to him as soon as this meeting is over, and he's going to go into the cohort cohort 16, cohort 17, cohort 25 summer, and the cohort 26 grant applications in eGap and upload the new MOU template and contract template in the required documents, so you'll have access to it there. Of course, I will also make sure that it's sent out in the weekly email this week, so you have a copy of it that way too. Currently, okay, so I do want to say this before anybody freaks out. I'm not asking for you to go in right now and redo every contract or MOA that you currently have in process, okay? You do not have to do that. Your current MOA, MOUs, MOAs, and contracts don't have to be revised using the new templates at this time, but anything moving from this point forward needs to be put onto the new, needs to use the new MOA or the new contracts, okay? So as you're revising a contract, use the new one. If you're developing a new contract with a new vendor, use the new one, okay? So hopefully we'll slowly weed out the old MOU template contracts, or I'm using contract and MOU interchangeably, but hopefully we'll get rid of those over time and we'll just have the new one out. I will say that for the new school year next year, for those of you who are still with us for next year, this is what you'll be asked to use for any new contracts going into the new year, or MOUs going into the new year. So here's the other thing. The templates that are provided are in Word, so you can modify them as needed. But there's things that we've put in place to help you with this, okay? So items that should be modified are highlighted in gray. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. I'll show you the templates in just a second. So the items that should be modified are highlighted in gray. Then also read the instructions for each section, because there's some sections that provide bullets for you that are example bullets that may or may not apply to what you're contracting a service for or contracting goods for. And so those are there for you to have as examples, but they may not fit with the work that's actually being done. And so if that's the case, you need to delete the ones that don't make any sense and then add bullets in the cases where you need to make sure that a full picture of that scope of work is being shown in that MOU or contract. Also, there are some bullets in those areas that are required by the federal government. So it'll say in the instructions, please, I think in both of them, it's bullets that are not in italics under certain sections. Those are required bullets. So you do not need to take them out, whether you feel like it applies or not, because they are requirements of the federal government for them to be in there. So make sure you're reading those instructions as you go through each section. The other thing I really, really request is, please, let's be professional about these contracts and MOUs and create a professional looking document. It is frustrating to me when I see that someone has taken the template and printed it out and handwritten all over it and crossed through things and hand wrote what services are going to be, or they left the word template at the top of the document, they left the instructions, that sort of thing. It is a template. It is not, it is something that you should be adjusting and fixing to make a professional looking document. So once you've got it the way you want it to look, and once you've picked out what your bullets need to be in the different places, and you've filled in all the information and the highlighted areas, please go back and remove those highlights, remove the template instructions, remove Form 3 sample at the top so that it just says either vendor contract or memorandum of understanding. And then don't make handwritten edits to this template. You all have computers. You all have the ability. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody has Word on a computer at some point, somewhere in their building. You have the ability to do this. The only thing that should be handwritten on that contract is the signature of yourself or the required, the people who are required to sign the contract, the vendor and you or your, whoever is responsible for signing contracts with your LEA or with your organization. Okay. All right. So let's look at a couple of these contracts. Give me just 1 second to find them on my computer. Okay. I'm going to drag it over. All right. So this is the Form 3 sample vendor contract. It may be a different form number in the new grants. I can't remember off the top of my head. So that will change. I may just take Form 3 off of there and just put sample vendor contract before I send it to be put onto the website. So right here, you would put your, don't leave this saying 21st Century Subgrantee. It should say the name of your 21st Century program. Okay. And then for contractors, it should say the name of the person you're contracting with. This is the vendor contract. Okay, again here, insert the name of the contractor. That should be deleted, put in the name of the contractor. Insert the name of the subgrantee. That should be placed here. Okay, then you have all of your information in these lines. Okay, this is highlighted because some of your programs are almost over. So it may be that the agreement is only for a period of 4 months, 3 months. Could be 2 months for just for the summer program, and up to 2 months. You might be cohort 16 and you're about to be done. So the new subgrants were for 5 years, but the old ones were for 3. So this might need to be changed to 3 years. Change things however it needs to be changed based on your program. Let me make this bigger so everybody can see it. I'm sorry, I just realized that. Just because I can see it on my screen doesn't mean you can. Okay. Scope of services. This is important. It says here, italicized bullets are examples only. Please modify as necessary by removing bullets that do not apply or adding bullets as needed to give a full and accurate picture of the scope of services provided. You must include the types of services and how often they're going to be provided in these bullets. And then notice it says non-italicized bullets are required in all contracts. These should not be removed. Okay, so here's our italicized bullets first. So the first one, contractor agrees to provide the following services and goods. And so you're going to insert the amount and the type of services, however many days a week, per month, per semester. The next bullet, contractor agrees to provide all required materials and supplies. Well, whoever you're contracting with might not be providing any materials and supplies. If that's the case, this bullet needs to go. You need to take it out. If part of the service is that they're providing materials and supplies, it needs to stay there. It might even need to be more specific as to what kind of materials and supplies they're providing. Okay. Again, these first bullets are just examples for you to go by. You need to tweak them. You need to change them however needed to make sure that a full picture of the services that are being provided is shown in these bullets. Contractor agrees to provide counseling and support. Okay, well, this may not be for a counselor or somebody who's providing some sort of support. If that's the case, it needs to come out. So I'm not going to read all of these different bullets to you, but notice at a certain point, we get down to bullets that are not italicized, and these are the ones that, according to Tiffany Kessler from Bruman, are required of all contracts. Okay, so these need to stay, all of the ones right here. Okay, again, I'm not going to read them all to you. Then here, funding and compensation. Bullets these are required bullets. It does say that. Okay, contractor will invoice subgrantee as follows, and you're going to put here what the contractor's compensation and the rates. Don't just tell me the total amount. We need to know you're paying them a certain amount of money per hour to work a certain number of hours per week, a certain number of weeks per year. It needs to be detailed so that it is explicit at what is being provided, and it needs to have a total contract amount as well. Contractors shall submit detailed invoices to the subgrantee identifying the service rendered. So this is where you're going to insert your details for invoicing, how invoices should be submitted, deadlines, that sort of thing. That is up to you and your LEA or CBO. And then you need to have this statement about the availability of federal funds. And so again, this is to help you if for some reason the 21st Century Program goes away, then this saves you from having to continue to contract with that person. It basically just says, if for any reason the funds are no longer available, the subgrantee didn't receive a subgrant award or continuation award, that terminates this contract. Okay, so you need to keep that in there. Then there's information here about modification and termination of the grant. This is not necessarily required. You may have different rules and regulations at your LEA that these need to be changed. If so, that's fine. And then here's those federal provisions that have to be there. And so all of this information, it's like 2 or 3 pages of different provisions that have to be included in all federal contracts. Those cannot be removed. Then you have an additional 5 federal provisions that can be removed from the contract if they don't apply to yours. So there's a provision for, and it says here look for the highlighted statements. Like for this first one, it says this one's required for contracts with a small business or a nonprofit. A lot of you would need that provision because a lot of you do contract with either small businesses or nonprofits. A Davis-Bacon Act provision is required for contracts over $2,000 that are only for construction, renovation, or painting. Well, that's not allowable with 21st Century, so that would need to be removed. I may just go ahead and remove it now because I know that's not going to be something that you guys are allowed. The Byrd Anti-Lobbying Amendment is required for contracts that are over $100,000. And then I think this is the last one. Oh no, there's a couple more. Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act is required for contracts over 100,000 involving employment of mechanics or laborers. Y'all shouldn't need that. Okay. And then you've got the Clean Air Act is required for contracts over $150,000. So those are provisions that most of you probably won't need in there except for the first one, and those can be removed. And then other provisions, this would be any provisions from your LEA that need to be added to the contract. For example, you might want to talk about insurance, permission to subcontract, liability, indemnification, anything like that. It's strongly recommended that you work with your local counsel to ensure that all of your state and local clauses are included in the contract. And then there's a place for it to be signed. So that's the first one. And then the second one is very similar. This is the MOU template. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Again, once you get finished adding the names, filling in the areas that need to be filled in, then you're going to clean it up at the end. You're going to remove all of your highlighted areas. You're going to remove Form 3 sample from it. You're going to remove any of the instructions. That doesn't need to be there for the actual contract, okay? So again, this shouldn't say 21st Century Subgrantee. This should say the name of your 21st Century Program. It should say the name of your partner. It should talk about the date range of when is this agreement applicable? What is the period of performance? Okay, so everything else is very similar. Has the same duration, where you need to change that. Duties of parties. And this one is different because it actually has what your responsibilities are and what the person that you're, I guess, really partnering with or having an agreement with, what their responsibilities are. So again, these are the italicized bullets are examples only. You can add to it or take out as much as, take them out if needed. Okay. And then you've got your partner responsibilities. Same thing. If it's not applicable, like for example, assume payroll responsibilities for after-school positions as budgeted. If you're contracting with someone, more than likely you do your own payroll, and that wouldn't be something that you would contract with someone with. So you would take that out. But you might be contracting with someone, or not contracting, I'm sorry. You might have an agreement with someone that they're going to do the payroll stuff and you're going to do something else, especially for like the partnerships between the CBO and LEA, that could happen. And so just read through these and make sure that they do describe the responsibilities of both parties very well, and very fully, so that there's no confusion as to who is providing what. And then again, if it's not in italics, you do not need to take it out. This is something that has to be included in the MOU as well. Then there's information about advisory board. If you don't expect that partner to be on the advisory board, you can remove this section if you would like to. We do recommend that you have partners on your advisory board, so I suggest you don't do that, but it may be that you have so many partners, you don't need them all to come and be on your advisory board, so you might want to remove it for certain people and not for others. And then again, if you have any kind of financial obligation by either party, it needs to be spelled out in the funding section. So if you're paying your partner, if you're paying something, it would be included here. So for example, this is the type of this MOU would be maybe used with CMP, child nutrition. If you're purchasing something from your child nutrition program, I know you're looking at me like, wait, what do you mean we can't do that? Just give me a minute, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about. But this is where you would talk about those purchases and any exchange of funds that's going to occur. Again, you need to have this clause in here about the availability of federal funds. If the federal funds go away, then the MOU terminates. Your procedures for modification and termination of the contract or the MOU, and then any other required provisions per state or local law that you want to add. You don't have to have the contract provisions in the MOU that you would normally have to have in a contract. So that is the difference between these two. It doesn't have all of those federal provisions because you're basically contracting within your organization, or you're creating an agreement with a nonprofit that is not necessarily making money, or not, there's not necessarily a financial exchange of money in there. And so that would be an MOU. And then there's a place for you guys to sign. All right. So before we go further, let's go ahead and see if anyone has any questions about this new process with MOUs versus contracts. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second.
Don't see any questions.
Don't see any questions. Thank you. It's hard for me to see the chat when I'm sharing.
I don't see any questions.
Any questions?
Question. Can you hear me?
Oh, there's one from Frida Cooper. It says, is that for one-time field trip or museum coming in for summer one time?
So that depends on your, that would depend on your procurement. I'm trying to think what they're called. I'm sorry. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. That you would need to base that off of your, sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the word. Hold on. Documented procurement procedures. That's what I was trying to think of. So that's up to your procurement procedures. Typically, but are you talking about, so you're asking about uploading it into EGAP though. Typically, we don't ask for that sort of thing to be uploaded into EGAP. In the past, it's mainly just been purchase services where you're purchasing services that are, where somebody's going to come to your site to provide some sort of professional development, or they're going to teach a class, that sort of thing. So right now, no, we would not ask you to upload that contract or MOU for like a field trip or anything like that. Now, you do need to have that for compliance monitoring. You need to have those documents somewhere, so that when compliance monitoring takes place, if we need to see them and ask for them, you'll have that available. But that's typically, right now, we would mainly just ask for purchase services as far as not that kind of thing, but more like you're bringing somebody into your building to provide some sort of service so that we can just make sure that that you're paying them what you say you're going to pay them, that they're doing the things that you say they're going to do, and that your contract actually does spell out what that person is going to be providing for your program, and that it matches what they, their qualifications, I guess, is the main thing the main thing I've looked for in the past is I'm looking for that you're hiring a qualified person to do the job. But then also now that I know, after doing some research and speaking with Tiffany and things like that, the reasoning why we would need to see something like that is just to make sure that your contract or your statement of services is actually telling us what those people are providing. And that has been something that has not really, it has been done at some sites, but I would say a majority of the sites have not done that in the past. At least not from the ones I have looked at, because typically I look at them and I'm like, this doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me what the person's doing. It doesn't tell me how much they're paying them. It was just not a very good, but it wasn't necessarily your fault. It was the template that you guys were provided and you just filled that out, but it didn't have the details in it that it needed to have for one thing. And then secondly, it didn't have all of those federally required provisions that have to be in there. So if you're ever audited and those aren't in there, then that could get you a finding from the federal government. So that would be a problem as well. Any other questions about contracts and MOUs? That sort of thing.
Cynthia said, sometimes the vendors and or contractors are unavailable to work their scheduled days for whatever reason. How does this affect the validity of the contract, since we are being specific to the days, hours total in the contract?
So you would just need to make sure that you don't pay them for the days they don't do the work that's in your contract. You're kind of treating them like an hourly employee, is kind of how I would say that. Not a salary person, but an hourly person. And so you can only put into the contract your plan of the services they're going to provide. But then let's say halfway through the year, that person's schedule changes and they're no longer able to come on Tuesdays when they could come on Tuesdays before. I would definitely say don't pay them for Tuesday's work. But then, if you wanted to, you can consider redoing the contract for the new hours that they are able to come. That's not something that we're going to ask to see or require that you do, but we would hope that you would only pay them for the services they would provide, and make sure you're documenting that.
Cynthia, did that answer all of your questions? Because I know you added something to your question as well. Or do you need the answer to?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure we were, I know we wouldn't pay them, but we were so specific. Also, we have had people to say that they are guaranteed the 2 days or whatever that were in the contract, and maybe the school was closed and they were trying to add it on the end somewhere else. So we just had a couple of things that come up like that, but we usually work it out. And sometimes they work when they're not supposed to, and that's an issue because they forgot or they didn't.
Right. And to me, that would be an argument of why it should be made specific, because if you're very specific in there about your needs of when you want them to provide the services and for how long, and they work above and beyond that, that is on them. And, you've spelled out in the contract that we need you to work this time for these amount of hours. And if they go beyond that and expect you to pay them for that, they can't expect you to pay them for that. If they work on days other than what you contracted them for, they can't expect you to pay them for that. So if you see that's an issue or a problem, that might be when you would say, hey, I'm seeing that this is going to be a problem. Let's revisit and let's renegotiate the contract so that we can spell out the new hours that you can work. So that's not a problem. So to me, that's an argument as to why you do want your contract to be very specific. That way they can't come back later and say, well, I came in on, I wasn't, you contracted for me to work on Tuesday and Thursday, but I wasn't able to come Thursday that week, but I came Friday. I want you to pay me for Friday. And you may have somebody else that does that work on Friday, and you had double the people there. I'm just throwing that out there. You may not want to pay them for that Friday. There might be a reason why, you needed that work to be done on Tuesday and Thursday. And so because you had it spelled out in that contract, you only have to pay them for the services that were in that contract. So, is there any other questions? And if you're a CBO and you don't have documented procurement procedures, please reach out. We have someone on staff who is working with LEAs who also need to maybe need a little help with their procurement procedures. And so she can work with you guys as well to help you develop those if needed. So please don't hesitate to reach out if that's something that you need help with. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next interesting, hopefully good news. Let's see. Okay, we're going to talk about food purchases. So as you know, in the past, we've always had a rule that the only way you could purchase food with 21st century funds was if you were purchasing it for an enrichment activity. And we have sort of the same rule with federal programs in general. We've just always said no food, no food. Well, one of the very first 21st century meetings I went to, I remember listening. I can't remember who it was that was speaking. I'm sorry. I can see their face. I remember listening to them talking about the struggle of running a summer program and having it where CMP provided breakfast and lunch, but then they had to figure out a way to get a snack for those kids because they were there until 3 or 4 in the afternoon. They ate lunch around, 10:30 or 11 in the morning. And by the time it was time for their parents to come pick them up, they were starving and they were having to go to local businesses and ask for people to donate things. And sometimes they could get people to donate and sometimes they couldn't. They were having to come out of pocket. The principal was having to come out of pocket to provide snacks and all of that. And I remember thinking, if I can change that, that's something I want to change. Well, we went to a Brewman, the Brewman fall conference several months ago, and food purchases came up in the conversation. And I took that, and I had Tiffany Kessler there at the table. We went to lunch, and I had Tiffany Kessler at the table, and I had Dr. Killingsworth at the table and other things. And I said, I think it's a shame that we can't provide snacks for this reason. And I told them the reason why. So first of all, I'm getting ahead of myself. So as you know, because of supplement, not supplant, if your LEA participates in CMP programs that can fund afternoon snacks and meals, 21st century funds cannot be used to purchase snacks and meals unless they're part of an enrichment activity. That's our current guidelines, and that's going to continue for after school programs, okay? All LEAs have a CMP program, and so for after school snacks, they can provide that for free, and so that is what you should take advantage of. But for summer programs, that supplement, not supplant rule still applies, but as many of you know, summer feeding, and there's 2 different summer feeding programs, SSO and SFSP. Don't ask me what they stand for. I knew at one point. But they can only provide a total of 2 meals or snacks per day, one or the other. And so they can only provide 2, which would in most cases be breakfast or lunch, but not a snack. And so I talked to her about this, and she was very willing to allow that because in federal guidance, it says that there are certain circumstances where you can pay for food if it is reasonable and necessary and allowable. And this would be a case that would be considered a reasonable reason for you to use 21st century funds to pay for a snack is if you don't you have a CMP program in your program, but they can only provide 2 meals. They already provide lunch and breakfast, but they can't provide a snack. In this case, we're now saying that you can use your 21st Century funds to purchase a snack from your CMP program. Okay. So there's some rules behind that. Now, the reason why we're saying you have to purchase it from the CMP program is that whenever possible, we want you to try your best. We want to follow the federal nutritional guidelines. And we know that if you purchase the snacks from CMP, that those guidelines will be met. Okay. And so that's why we're saying you can't go to Sam's and purchase a big box of potato chips. You would need to purchase those snacks from your LEA CMP program. Now, I went to the CMP conference, I think 2 weeks ago now, and I spoke to all of the CMP directors in the state, or at least all the ones that were at the conference. I believe most of them were there, and explained this to them. I wanted to talk to them before I talked to you guys, so that if you came to them and started talking to them about it, they would know what was going on. They would know what we're saying is allowed. All right, so that's why they got the information first. Some of you may have already been informed by your CMP people. Some people, that's maybe totally new information for you. Okay, so here's the snack purchase requirement. The snack must be additional to the 2 meals or snacks provided by the summer feeding program. So they do have to, you had to have used your local CMP summer feeding program to provide 2 meals that day in order for you to be able to use money to buy the snack. Okay. The price also has to be reasonable and comparable to fair market prices for similar items. Now, I know y'all have heard me mention this before, but my husband works for CMP. He's an accountant for CMP, and so he helped me actually create this wording right here. They have to provide a meal calculation to explain how this snack cost was determined. So, for example, CMP must include a plate cost calculation that may incorporate a profit margin percentage to account for unforeseen expenses such as inflation and fluctuation in market prices. They can also include in that price the cost of labor for ordering the snack, for packaging the snacks. They can include all of that in their plate cost calculation. I hear my husband talk about plate cost calculations all the time, and it's not just the price of the food, but it includes the price of the labor around preparing the food, ordering the food, getting the food ready, all of those things. That can be included in the cost of the snack as well. And as long as that price that they provide to you, and it's okay for them to make a little bit of money. Some of our CMP programs have been hesitant to help with things like this in the past, I think, because the amount that the government reimburses them is not enough to cover the cost of the meals that they're providing, and so their budgets are they're in a deficiency. They have a deficient budget, and so one of the ways that I, kind of encourage them, or one of the ways I encourage them to help you guys out by providing these snacks is saying, it is okay for you to charge more than what you normally are typically reimbursed by the federal government for these snacks, as long as it's not a ridiculous amount of money. Okay. But remember, when they're providing these snacks, they're going to provide a drink. They're going to provide, they have to provide, I think, like a certain amount of food groups in the snack. It's not just going to be a bag of chips. It's going to be milk, it's going to have a vegetable, all the different requirements. I'm not sure what the snack requirements are, but it's going to meet those requirements. So it's going to be better than what you would normally buy at your local Sam's or something like that. Maybe a little bit more expensive, but that's okay as long as it's reasonable. And they can show how they came up with that price. And then you have to have an MOU in place between the CMP program and the 21st site, detailing the number of snacks that will be provided per day, the number of days they will be provided, the price per snack, which includes that meal calculation, and the total contract amount. Okay. So that's for those of you who do have CMP programs that run a summer feeding program in your LA. Well, what if you don't run a summer feeding program? There are some LEAs that don't run a summer feeding program. They don't have to, it's not a requirement. Again, some of them, my husband has explained to me that some of them are in such a deficit with their budget for the school year, they can't afford to run a summer program, or they have an issue finding staffing to run a summer program. There's all kinds of reasons why they may not be doing a summer feeding program in your LEA. If that is the case, and your LEA is not doing summer feeding, but you're having a summer program with your 21st century grant, then with permission, you may be able to use 21st century funds to provide breakfast, lunch, and a snack for your summer program. So here's the requirements for that. First of all, you have to provide a letter from your superintendent stating that your LEA's CMP program or child nutrition program will not run any summer feeding programs during the summer. Now, please note, I'm saying none in the LEA at all, not one at your school, okay? Within it, let's say that there's 10 schools in an LEA. If one of those schools is offer summer feeding, you should be able to get your food and snacks from that summer feeding program. Okay, now you might have to work out and negotiate travel to have them delivered or to go pick them up or something like that. And we can talk about that if that's the case. But when I say there's not a summer feeding program in your LEA, I mean at none of the schools in your LEA. At none of the local churches. There's not going to be a summer feeding anywhere in your LEA, summer feeding program anywhere in your LEAs. That's the only way this is going to work. So again, you have to provide a letter from the superintendent stating that your LEA child nutrition program will not run any summer feeding programs during the summer. And then you must submit a meal plan. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not mean to do that. You must submit a meal plan proposal that includes the cost of each meal with that meal cost calculation, the contractor who will provide the meals, a plan for how the food will be delivered and or stored if necessary, where the meals will be served, etc. That meal plan must be approved by the ALSDE, okay? Now, this is a continuation. We highly recommend that you contract to purchase meals and snacks from another LEA's CMP program if possible. The reason for that, again, is we know it's going to be healthy food for the kids. We know it's going to meet those nutritional guidelines. My husband has explained to me that there's some LEAs who provide summer feeding for like 6 other LEAs that are in their surrounding area, or even more than that. They have it down pat. They have it actually, the more people they feed, the more money that program can make because they can get food in bulk and things like that. So it is actually beneficial to those programs to serve other LEAs if they need it. So we highly recommend for you to reach out to other LEAs and see if there's a CMP program that will be available to provide those meals and snacks for you. If not, we highly recommend that you follow CMP nutritional guidelines as much as possible when working with whatever local restaurant or business that's going to provide your meals, okay? Again, I think it's going to be easier also for you to contract with a CMP program because they know, another LEA CMP program because they know what they're doing and they know how to package the meals. They know all that. A lot of them like serve local churches. They serve YMCAs, or they serve local library, other, just other places that have a summer program. So they're used to doing this. When a local restaurant may be questionable as to how they're going to package the meals and all that kind of stuff, how they're going to get them to you. But I'm not saying you can't do that, but that's what we highly recommend you do. And again, I want to remind you that hopefully the supplemental funding will be released any minute now. I promise you, I've been asking, where is it? Where is it? Last I heard, it was in accounting for them to look at. As soon, of course, I already know we're going to have to probably adjust the due dates for the supplemental funding, but Now that you have this information, and if this is something that will be beneficial to your summer program, don't forget that that can be one of the things that you apply for supplemental funding for. It can be used to enhance your summer program, and it could be used to do these food purchases if that applies to your LEA, if you're able to do that. All right. So what questions do we have about food? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, I think. Let's see.
I don't see any questions.
No questions?
I don't see any. And
Okay, hold on.
someone, would someone like to ask a question to Amanda?
I'm sorry?
I asked if they have any questions for you.
Oh, okay. I thought that I would be blown up with questions about this. Hopefully that means I did a good job.
You did an outstanding job. They are waiting to ask later, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, and this might be a lot to take in. So if you have questions later after this meeting, feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email is the best way to get in touch with me. And I'll be happy to help. Yeah, happy to answer as best I can. I will let you know that another thing that might come down the pike, but I don't know for sure yet, is that we may start allowing food purchases also for family and parent engagement. But again, I have to verify that for sure with Dr. Killingsworth. I know she is thinking about allowing that to be something that other federal programs do. And that would only be if it was reasonable and necessary. So for example, if you did a family and parent and family engagement activity that ran around the same time as a normal dinner time would be, so let's say 6 or 7 o'clock or sometime between 5 and 7, you want to do a family and parent, parent and family engagement activity. And you want to provide like hors d'oeuvres and that sort of thing, that also may potentially be an allowable expense in the future. I'm not saying it's allowable yet. Let me, Dr. Killingsworth wasn't here for me to ask today, but I'm going to check with her to see if that could be applicable for us as well, but I'm pretty sure it will be. So under certain circumstances, you may be able to purchase food for things like that too. Lisa, yes, you're welcome to unmute to ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Having a hard time with this. Okay, I am totally illiterate when it comes to the CMP program. That's probably the least thing in education that I know anything about.
Okay.
Do you have some guidance, or does your husband, a list of what our choices are to order? When you say that we can do this for snack, is that going to be, could that be a sandwich and or whatever? Could you send us something for some guidance, or do we just need to totally depend on our CMP manager for that?
I would say depend on your CMP manager, just because, I mean, you can find guidance on the State Department website about nutritional guidelines and things like that. But I know in the past, Dr. Killingsworth has pretty much like instructed us to kind of stay in our own wheelhouse and not make recommendations about other programs, rules and guidelines, because I'm definitely not a CMP expert. And so I would suggest reaching out to your LEA's CMP director and talking to them about what those options might be. I know that they have to have like a certain amount, a certain number of ounces of vegetables, a certain ounces of meat. So it could potentially be like a sandwich or something like that. I just don't know. And it could be a variety of things. It could be not the same snack every day, but it could be that they figure out a way, okay, you're going to pay us $5 per snack, and hopefully it could be a little bit less than that, but $5 per snack, and this is the range of snacks that we'll provide that meet the nutritional guidelines. And so, yeah, I would say get with your local CMP person for that. But again, there is guidance on the ALSDE Alabama Achieves website for CMP, because I went and read a lot of it when I was getting ready for my meeting with CMP a couple of weeks ago. That was nerve-wracking to present in front of a bunch of people that about their program when I know very little about it other than what I hear my husband say. So, but yeah, that's what I would highly recommend that you do. Okay, so as far as materials and supplies, as far as the object code and function code, I've already reached out. I meant to say this, and then thank you for asking that question. I've reached out to accounting to find out what the appropriate function and object codes will be for purchasing food. And they haven't gotten back to me yet. They first of all said I didn't think that was allowed, and so they asked me to provide the federal guidance saying that it was allowed, and so I provided that this morning. And I'm just still waiting to hear back from them to tell me what function and function and object codes you would need to use for food. In my head, it might be different whether it could potentially, well, I don't know. I was about to say it might be different if you're purchasing a whole meal versus just food, but there really shouldn't be a case where you're just purchasing food from like a local store or anything. Hopefully you're going through some sort of vendor or restaurant or something like that to provide that food. But yeah, so as soon as I get those codes, as soon as I get that guidance from accounting, we will make sure that we get that sent out. Hopefully, maybe I'll have it by the end of the week and we can send it out in the end of week email so that you'll have that information for any budget revisions you want to do. So glad that y'all are happy about it. Okay. Any other questions? So again, hopefully all of your CMP directors heard my plea for help, and that's exactly what I did. Is plea for them to help you guys in every way that they could, and they all seem to be very open to being helpful with this. So they should know what you're talking about when you contact them, and be able to work with you to figure out a way to do this. And if for some reason they're not willing to help out, just let me know, and maybe we can foster a conversation between your CMP person and us, and maybe I can get my husband in on it, and because he's really good at he knows all of the rules and regulations and guidelines and understands the issues that they face, and so maybe together we can meet with the CMP person to try to talk them into being more helpful if they're trying to not be helpful. Hopefully they will be. All right. Okay, anything else? Any questions anybody else has for anything that's going on? Almost to the end of the year. Again, as soon as I get that supplementary grant information, I will get it out to you guys. I really thought we'd have it back by now. I don't know why it's taken so long, but as soon as we get it back, I'll get it out to you guys with the new updated timeline. But I would like to keep that timeline as small as possible so that you can get your funds hopefully before summer gets here. So go ahead. If you haven't watched it already, watch the video of me going through the supplementary grant, and go ahead and start preparing your answers to your questions. So hopefully all you have to do once it's finally released is just copy and paste into the template and then send it on. Hopefully we'll have that to you in the next couple of days. All right.
Amanda, can I ask a quick question
Yeah.
about not related to this, but to close
Okay. Yeah,
out,
sure.
because we'd had a little bit of confusion. There's a closeout form. Is all of the closeout forms supposed to be completed and sent to either our TA or the other lady that is helping prior to them visiting, or is there one that they fill out together while they're here?
I
We-
want to say, and Linda, you might be able to help me with this, one of the Lindas. I believe that there's a form you're supposed to fill out and send ahead of time. But that guidance, there should be, I think Alicia did a presentation about the closeout. And that a link to that should be somewhere in one of the last few weekly emails. I'm sorry, I didn't have a I kind of turned that over to her to handle while I was working on other things like this. So I'm not as well versed on the closeout procedures as Alicia or as Alicia is, but you could reach out to her. I don't know if she's in this meeting.
Okay.
I don't think she is, but
And
yeah.
I'll just try to go back through the video too as well.
Okay.
I was just
Yeah, so Sarah
hoping for a
said the
fast
narrative goes to your ALSDE specialist prior to the date, and then all other paperwork can go to the TA so they're prepared to check your inventory.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Correct. And also they got an email from Erica, so that's in a
Yeah.
back email that she sent out.
Perfect.
All right.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? All right, well, I guess we will go ahead and conclude today's meeting. If you think of anything after we close out today, feel free to send an email, and we're happy to help you in any way possible. And I hope you guys have a great evening.
Thank you all.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording, Linda, I guess.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you guys for your help.
Have a great evening.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You too.